Welcome to today's deep dive. We've got a pretty hefty stack of reading this time around.
Yeah, quite a collection.
It is excerpts from academic textbooks all about psychotherapy,
Lots of different perspectives.
but specifically focusing on how therapy works across different age groups. So,
Kind of a lifespan approach.
exactly. Yeah, we're going to be exploring how the techniques and the challenges, and really the whole approach to therapy shifts and changes depending on who's sitting in that therapist's chair.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because we often think of therapy as this kind of one-size-fits-all thing,
Right.
but these texts really highlight how much of a tailored journey it is.
Oh, for sure. And that's something I think is valuable for everyone to understand. Even
Yeah.
if you're not, training to be a therapist or anything like that, this knowledge can give you incredible insights into your own personal growth
Definitely.
and even your relationships with others, because it's all about understanding how people think and feel and interact at different stages of their lives.
And how those things impact the way they might approach therapy.
Right. Exactly. So let's start right at the beginning.
Okay.
Psychotherapy with children.
The little ones.
Yes. And I think what's really interesting here is that the texts emphasize that it's not just about shrinking down adult techniques.
Oh, absolutely not.
Kids see the world so differently, right?
They do.
They have different ways of processing information,
different needs.
different ways of communicating. So you can't just, take what works for a 40-year-old and expect it to work for a 4-year-old.
Yeah, it's not about miniaturizing adult therapy.
Exactly. And that's where play therapy comes in.
The power of play.
Yes, it's based on this idea that play is a child's natural language.
It's how they make sense of the world.
Exactly. And so therapists can use play to understand their anxieties.
Yeah, observe them.
Help them develop crucial skills all through the medium of play.
It's amazing how much you can learn about a child just by watching them play.
Oh, absolutely. One of the texts even describes it as like creating a symbolic space where kids can act out their fears,
Mhm.
their anxieties, things that they might not even be able to articulate verbally.
Right. And it's not just about, letting them run wild.
No.
The therapist is very much involved observing, guiding, helping the child to make sense of what's coming up.
Yeah, and one of the key skills that they're helping to develop is something called mentalization.
Oh, that's a big one.
It is, right?
Okay.
So it's that ability to understand their own thoughts and feelings, but also to recognize that other people have their own separate minds.
And perspectives, yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
like giving them the building blocks for empathy.
And emotional intelligence right from the start.
Yeah, crucial stuff.
Absolutely.
But the texts also stress that therapy with children often involves the parents, too.
Right. It's not just about the child in isolation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing how interconnected those relationships are.
The family system.
Yeah, and it's not about, pointing fingers or blaming anyone.
Yeah, no.
But it's about helping parents understand their child's development.
And recognizing how their own experiences might be playing a role.
Because sometimes a parent's own anxieties can inadvertently impact their child.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. If a parent is constantly worried about their child getting hurt,
Right.
that anxiety can rub off on the child.
It's like they absorb it.
They do. And so part of the work is helping parents to kind of separate their own baggage from their child's experience.
It's like untangling those threads
Yeah, a little bit.
and empowering both the parent and the child to understand each other better.
To communicate more effectively.
Now, the texts also highlight cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as a
Yeah.
really effective approach for kids.
It can be very helpful.
But I have to admit, when I think of CBT, I think of adults,
Tracking their thoughts.
Yeah, challenging those negative thinking patterns.
Journaling.
Right. How does that even work with children?
Well, it's all about adapting the techniques to their developmental level.
Okay.
So instead of writing in a thought journal,
Yeah.
a child might draw pictures of their feelings or use puppets to act out different scenarios.
I love that.
Yeah, it's making it fun and engaging.
Right. So it's still about giving them tools to manage their thoughts and feelings,
Absolutely.
but in a way that makes sense for their age.
Developmentally appropriate.
Exactly. And one of the texts gave a really cute example of teaching a child to use a worry box.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Yeah, so they can write down or draw their worries and then put them in the box.
Like they're physically letting go.
Exactly. And it helps them feel like they have some control over those worries,
Which is so important for kids.
especially when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Right, they need those coping mechanisms.
We also have to talk about family therapy.
Another big one.
Yes, because this is mentioned quite a bit in the texts.
It's a cornerstone of working with children.
And I think a lot of people assume family therapy is about, you know, blaming or fixing someone.
Right.
But that's not really the goal, is it?
Not at all.
What is it really about?
Well, family therapy recognizes that a child's problems are often intertwined with the family dynamics.
Oh.
The way they communicate, the way they interact, the way they relate to each other.
So it's less about the individual and more about the system.
Exactly. It's about shifting those patterns in a healthy way.
Looking at the whole picture.
The whole system.
Okay, that makes sense. And the texts mention a few different types of family therapy.
There are a few different approaches.
Yeah. Structural family therapy, brief solution-focused therapy, and narrative therapy.
Lots of names.
I know, right? It can sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, let's break it down a bit.
Please.
So structural family therapy focuses on those underlying patterns and hierarchies in the family.
Okay.
It's about understanding those invisible rules.
It's about creating a healthier structure for the family to thrive in.
Exactly. It's like rearranging the furniture in a room
I like that analogy.
to create a more functional space.
Yeah, making it work better for everyone.
Right.
Then we have brief solution-focused therapy, which is all about, as the name suggests, finding solutions.
Very practical.
It is, and it's very strengths-based.
Focusing on what's working well
Right, so instead of dwelling on the problems, you're looking at what's already going well.
and how you can build on those strengths.
Like looking at the glass half full.
Exactly. A positive perspective.
And finally, there's narrative therapy.
This one's interesting.
It is so. Tell me more.
Well, narrative therapy explores how the stories we tell ourselves shape our realities.
Okay.
It's about helping families reframe their narratives around a problem.
So instead of seeing themselves as, stuck or broken,
Right.
they start to see themselves as capable and resilient.
Exactly. It's about changing the narrative.
Okay, I love that. And it makes sense because we all tell ourselves stories, right?
We do all the time.
And sometimes those stories can be really limiting.
Absolutely. They can hold us back.
So it's about rewriting those stories in a more empowering way.
And creating new possibilities.
Now, one thing that's emphasized throughout these texts is the importance of involving the child in family therapy.
Yeah, they need to have a voice.
Exactly, and in a way that makes sense to them.
Right? It's not about forcing them into adult conversations.
No.
It's about finding ways for them to participate that are comfortable and appropriate for their age.
So it might be drawing pictures,
Playing games,
or even just expressing themselves through their body language.
whatever works for them.
The key is to create a space where they feel heard and respected.
Absolutely, their perspective matters.
All right, let's move on to the teenage years.
Oh, teenagers.
Psychotherapy with adolescents.
A whole new set of challenges.
And the texts really emphasize how crucial it is for therapists to understand this unique developmental stage.
It's a time of so much change.
It is,
Yeah.
right? They're going through so much physically, emotionally.
Cognitively.
Hormonally, it's like a roller coaster.
It really is.
And I remember feeling like everyone was watching and judging me.
The imaginary audience.
Yes, one of the texts uses that term, and I was like, that is so accurate.
It's a very real experience for many teenagers.
Right, because they're trying to figure out who they are,
Where they fit in.
what they believe in.
And all while feeling like the whole world is scrutinizing their every move.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
It is.
And on top of that, they're dealing with puberty academic pressures.
Changing relationships with their parents.
It's a lot to handle.
And it's why therapy can be so valuable for teens.
Providing them with a safe space to process all of that
Absolutely, to develop coping skills,
and to build a stronger sense of self.
which is so important during those formative years.
The texts dive into the treatment of depression in adolescence.
A big issue, unfortunately,
It is, and they highlight CBT.
which we talked about earlier.
We did, and also interpersonal psychotherapy, or IPT.
Another effective approach.
So can you give us a quick rundown of IPT and how it works?
Sure, IPT focuses on improving interpersonal relationships and social functioning.
Okay.
It's based on the idea that our relationships play a major role in our emotional well-being.
So it's about strengthening those connections.
Exactly, and improving communication skills.
So if a teenager is struggling with depression, IPT would look at their relationships with family, friends, peers.
To see if there are any patterns or conflicts that might be contributing to their symptoms.
So it's less about challenging negative thought patterns like in CBT
Right.
and more about building healthy connections,
And developing those social skills.
which can be really helpful for teens because at that age, their social world is everything.
Absolutely. Their peers are so important.
The texts also mention anxiety as a major issue in adolescence.
Another big one.
And they highlight the importance of working with the parents again.
It goes back to that idea of the family system.
Right, because a parent's anxiety can sometimes impact their child.
Think about a teenager with social anxiety.
Okay.
If their parents are also anxious in social situations, the teenager might pick up on those cues.
Right, and learn to avoid those situations as well.
It becomes a cycle.
So it's like a cycle that needs to be broken.
Exactly. And therapy can help with that by addressing the anxiety in both the teenager and the parent.
Okay, so it's a two-pronged approach.
You could say that.
What about conduct disorders?
Conduct disorders.
The texts mentioned family-based therapies as being particularly effective in those cases.
They can be very helpful.
So for those who aren't familiar with the term, what exactly are conduct disorders?
Well, conduct disorders involve behaviors like aggression, rule-breaking defiance.
Okay.
Basically, behaviors that violate the rights of others or societal norms.
And family therapy can help by addressing those underlying family dynamics.
Right. It's about looking at the bigger picture.
So it's not about blaming the child,
No.
but rather understanding the context in which those behaviors are happening.
Exactly. One of the texts uses the analogy of a mobile.
Oh, I like that.
If one part of the mobile is out of whack,
Yeah.
it throws the whole thing off balance.
Right. So it's like if there's conflict or dysfunction in the family system.
It can manifest in a child's behavior.
That's such a helpful way to think about it.
It helps to visualize those connections.
And the texts mention a few specific types of therapy that are often used for conduct disorders.
Like anger control training,
Okay.
functional family therapy, and multisystemic therapy.
So let's break those down a bit.
Sure.
Anger control training sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. It's about teaching teens how to manage their anger in healthy ways.
So not about suppressing their anger,
No,
but about expressing it appropriately.
exactly. They learn to recognize their triggers,
Okay.
use coping skills like deep breathing or self-talk,
Yeah.
and find appropriate ways to express their frustration.
So it's about giving them those tools to manage their emotions.
Right. To channel that anger constructively,
Then there's functional family therapy.
which takes a closer look at those interaction patterns within the family.
Okay.
That might be inadvertently reinforcing the negative behaviors
So it's like figuring out what's unintentionally rewarding the conduct disorder,
and then shifting those dynamics.
like changing the rules of the game. And
Ish.
finally, we have multisystemic therapy.
Or MST for short.
What is that all about?
MST takes a really comprehensive approach.
Okay.
It looks at the whole ecosystem surrounding the teenager.
So not just the family.
No, the family, the school, the peer group, the community.
Wow, that's a lot of systems.
It is.
And it's about understanding and addressing all the factors contributing to the conduct disorder.
Right, because behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it's influenced by so many things.
And MST is all about working collaboratively with everyone involved.
So it's like building a network of support around the teenager.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered childhood and adolescence, those really formative years where the brain is still developing and there's so much change happening.
A lot going on.
Let's move into adulthood, starting with those fledgling years between 18 and 25.
Emerging adulthood.
Yes, one of the texts uses that term, and I love it
It's a good one.
because it really captures that sense of transition and exploration.
There's a lot of uncertainty and questioning during that time,
It's like that in-between stage, right? Not
Yeah.
quite a teenager.
but not quite a full-fledged adult either.
And the texts highlight that this can be a time of real instability for some.
Especially as they navigate relationships, career choices, financial pressures.
It can feel overwhelming.
You can.
And one of the texts even uses the term boomerang generation
Yeah.
to describe that trend of young adults moving back in with their parents.
It's a sign of the times.
It is, right? It speaks to those economic realities.
And the fact that it often takes longer to establish independence these days.
So what are some of the common issues that people in this age group might bring to therapy?
Well, the texts mention difficulties with family and friends, questions around sexual identity, career struggles, financial woes.
So basically all the big stuff.
It is a time of big decisions and transitions
And therapy can provide that space to process those experiences
to explore different options.
and to develop coping mechanisms for those inevitable challenges.
Exactly. It's about having that support as they navigate this uncharted territory.
All right, let's move on to young adulthood, roughly between 25 and 40. The texts describe this phase as a time when life starts to settle down.
In quotation marks.
Yes, because they caution that this can bring its own set of challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
So tell me more.
Well, the settling down phase can sometimes feel like a bit of a letdown
Really?
after the excitement and exploration of emerging adulthood.
Okay. I can see that.
It's often a time of increased responsibilities.
Yeah, careers, relationships, maybe even starting a family.
All of that.
And that can lead to feelings of overwhelmed stress, even a sense of loss for those carefree younger days.
It's like trading in those endless possibilities for a more defined path.
Right, and sometimes that can feel a bit stifling.
It can.
And the texts point out that the losses of this phase are often overlooked.
Yes, people tend to focus on the gains.
But there are losses too.
Absolutely, like letting go of some of those youthful freedoms.
Right.
Navigating those shifting relationships with family and friends.
Yeah, because your priorities change.
They do. And sometimes you grow apart from people.
And sometimes you have to grieve those dreams that didn't quite pan out.
That can be tough.
It can. And the texts specifically mention anxieties around childbearing decisions.
A big one for many people.
It is, and the adjustments to parenthood.
Parenthood is a huge transition.
It is, and it's not always easy.
Definitely not.
So therapy can provide a space to process all of that.
To develop coping mechanisms for the sleep deprivation.
Is stress.
And even those inevitable moments of self-doubt that come with being responsible for another human being.
Yeah, and it's not just about the practicalities of parenting, right?
No.
There's also that identity shift that happens.
When you become a parent, your priorities change, your relationships change, even your sense of self changes.
And that can be a lot to adjust to.
It could be a real identity crisis for some people.
So therapy can help people navigate those changes and find a new sense of balance.
Exactly. It's
Yep.
about finding that new normal.
But what about those who don't become parents?
Oh, that's an important point, too.
Right, because not everyone follows that same path.
Do the texts address that experience as well?
They do. They talk about the importance of coming to terms with those non-events
The paths not taken.
and how that can sometimes lead to feelings of loss or regret.
Especially if there's that societal pressure to follow a certain timeline.
Right, like you're supposed to get married, have kids, buy a house by a certain age.
And if you don't do those things, you're somehow failing.
Exactly. And so therapy can help people
To challenge those assumptions.
and to create a life that feels authentic and fulfilling regardless of whether they choose to have children or not.
It's about defining success and happiness on your own terms,
I love that.
not based on societal expectations.
Okay, we've navigated emerging adulthood and young adulthood, a lot of transitions, decisions, adjustments.
It's a busy time.
It is now, let's step into the next chapter, middle adulthood, that period between 40 and 65.
The midlife years,
Often perceived as a time of crisis.
the midlife crisis.
But is that always the case?
Not necessary.
Okay, so tell me more.
Well, the texts emphasize that while midlife can be a time of reflection and reevaluation,
Right.
it doesn't have to be a crisis.
Okay.
It can also be a period of growth fulfillment, even a renewed sense of purpose.
I like that reframing.
It's about shifting the perspective.
And one of the texts even mentions Erickson's stages of psychosocial development.
Ah, yes, Eric.
And they point out that middle adulthood is all about generativity versus stagnation.
A classic developmental challenge.
It is, right? So tell me more about that.
Well, it's about finding ways to contribute to the world,
Oh.
whether that's through raising children
Pursuing a meaningful career.
or giving back to the community.
So it's about feeling like you're making a difference.
Exactly, leaving your mark on the world.
And the texts are quick to point out that this stereotypical midlife crisis isn't always accurate.
It's more nuanced than that,
So it's not necessarily about buying a sports car or having an affair.
and always.
What is it about then?
It's more about that internal process of questioning. Questioning your values, your goals, your place in the world.
So it's a time of introspection.
You could say that.
So what are some of the common concerns that folks in this age group might bring to therapy?
Well, work and career changes are often a big one.
Makes sense.
Maybe they're feeling burnt out in their current job,
Yeah.
or they're looking for a new challenge.
Maybe they're thinking about retirement.
That too.
And then there's the reality of shifting family dynamics.
Right. Children might be leaving home.
Aging parents might need more support.
It's a juggling act.
And then there are the physical and emotional changes that come with aging.
Those are unavoidable.
They are right. The texts mention health concerns the awareness of mortality.
And even the realization that some of those youthful dreams might not come to fruition.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
And therapy can provide a space to grieve those losses
To adjust to those changes.
and to find new ways to find meaning and purpose in this stage of life.
It's about embracing the aging process.
One of the texts actually shares a fascinating finding about happiness,
Oh, tell me.
that it follows a U-shaped curve with middle-aged folks being the unhappiest.
Interesting.
I know, right? It surprised me.
It does challenge that assumption that midlife is always a time of doom and gloom.
But it also makes sense when you think about all the pressures and transitions that people are going through during this phase
Right. It's like that pressure to have it all figured out.
can actually lead to more dissatisfaction.
It can backfire.
Oh, okay, we've journeyed through childhood, adolescence, and now middle adulthood.
What a journey.
Let's talk about the final stage of life, psychotherapy with older adults.
Often overlooked population.
And one that faces a lot of stigma when it comes to therapy.
Yeah, there's often this misconception that it's too late for therapy for older folks.
Like they're somehow beyond help.
Which is ridiculous.
Absolutely, and these texts really push back against that notion.
They emphasize that late life is its own developmental stage.
With its own unique set of challenges.
And opportunities for growth.
And that therapy is not just about childhood.
It's about addressing the issues and concerns that are relevant to this stage of life.
Right. So what might that look like?
Well, it might be about coping with loss,
Adjusting to retirement.
managing health issues.
Or finding ways to stay connected and engaged in the community.
It's about maintaining quality of life.
One of the texts highlights the importance of therapists being aware of the unique dynamics that come with working with older clients.
Especially when it comes to transference and countertransference.
Those are pretty technical terms. Can you break them down for us?
Sure. Transference is when a client unconsciously transfers feelings they have towards someone else onto the therapist.
Okay.
For example, if a client had a difficult relationship with their father,
Right.
they might start to see the therapist as a father figure,
And react to them in similar ways.
even if they're not consciously aware of it.
So it's like those past relationships are playing out in the therapy room.
Exactly.
And countertransference is the flip side of that, right?
That's right. It's when the therapist's own feelings and experiences start to influence the way they interact with the client.
So if a therapist has unresolved issues with their own aging parents.
Those feelings might unconsciously come up in their work with an older client.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It's something that all therapists need to be aware of.
To make sure they're not letting their own biases interfere.
Absolutely.
The texts mention a range of therapies that can be effective for older adults.
Like psychodynamic therapy,
CBT,
interpersonal therapy,
and family therapy.
all of those can be adapted to meet the needs of older clients,
And they also bring up something called reminiscence life review therapy.
which is widely used with this population.
So tell me more about that.
Well, reminiscence therapy involves recalling and sharing memories from the past,
Okay.
often with the help of photos, music, or other prompts.
So it's about revisiting those cherished moments.
Exactly, and reminiscing about loved ones.
It sounds like a really beautiful way to connect with the past.
It can be very powerful.
And then there's life review therapy, which seems a bit more in-depth.
It is life review therapy involves a deeper exploration of one's life story,
Okay.
often with the goal of resolving past conflicts, finding meaning, achieving a sense of peace and acceptance,
So it's about reflecting on your life.
and making peace with it all.
That sounds really profound.
It can be especially helpful for older adults who are facing a terminal illness,
Or who are struggling with regrets.
unresolved issues from their past.
Now, one question that came up for me when we were talking about older adults in therapy is, what about those who might be experiencing cognitive decline?
Like dementia.
Yes. Can therapy still be helpful for them?
That's a great question, and it's one that the texts address directly.
So what's the answer?
While traditional talk therapy might not be as effective for someone with dementia,
Right.
there are still interventions that can be beneficial.
Okay, so what might that look like?
It might involve adapted CBT techniques to manage anxiety,
Okay.
or behavioral approaches to address specific challenges.
Like agitation.
Sleep disturbances.
So the focus is on improving their quality of life in the present moment.
Rather than trying to delve into complex psychological issues from the past?
And it's also about supporting their caregivers.
Absolutely, because they often face tremendous stress and burnout.
It's a tough job.
It is
The texts also emphasize that therapists need to be culturally sensitive
an important consideration.
and understand the impact of cohort effects on the lives of older adults.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, it means recognizing that different generations have lived through different historical events.
And social changes.
And those experiences shape their worldview.
Right, so someone who grew up during the Great Depression
Might have a very different perspective on money and security.
than someone who grew up during the economic boom of the 1990s.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
about understanding those nuances.
And tailoring therapy accordingly.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Never is.
One of the texts actually shares a helpful acronym for therapists to keep in mind when working with older adults. MICPS. What does that stand for?
It stands for memory intelligence, chronicity, kindness, and support.
Okay, break that down for us. What does each element represent?
Sure. Well, memory reminds us to be mindful of potential cognitive limitations
Okay.
and to adjust our communication accordingly.
So we might need to speak slower
Use simpler language.
or repeat things more often.
Exactly.
And intelligence encourages us to recognize that older adults have a wealth of knowledge and experience to draw on.
Even if their cognitive functioning might be declining.
It's about respecting their wisdom.
Absolutely.
And chronicity highlights the prevalence of chronic illnesses in this population.
And the importance of understanding their impact on the individual's well-being.
So it's about taking a holistic approach.
Right, recognizing that physical health and mental health are intertwined.
And what about kindness and support?
Well, kindness reminds us to approach our older clients with empathy and compassion.
No.
It's about recognizing that they might be facing a lot of losses and challenges.
And to offer a safe and non-judgmental space.
Exactly.
And support highlights the importance of connecting them with resources.
Advocating for their needs.
Providing practical assistance.
It's about going above and beyond.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more key point in the text that I want to touch on.
Okay.
They talk about the importance of recognizing that therapy for older adults is not just about childhood.
It's a common misconception.
It is, and it often leads to those ageist assumptions that therapy is only for fixing things from the past.
But as we've seen, each stage of life brings its own unique set of challenges.
And opportunities for growth.
Right. And the texts even mention cognitive analytic therapy, or CAT,
Okay.
as being particularly useful for older adults with depression or personality disorders,
Okay.
especially if they have experienced past trauma.
Interesting. So tell me more about CAT.
Well, CAT combines elements of psychodynamic therapy and cognitive therapy.
Okay, so it's kind of a hybrid approach.
You could say that.
And how does it work?
Well, it's about understanding how early experiences might be influencing current patterns of thinking and behaving.
So it acknowledges the past.
But it doesn't dwell on it.
Right, and then it focuses on developing strategies to break free from those unhelpful cycles.
It's about creating new possibilities.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today, from play therapy with toddlers to life review therapy with older adults.
It's been a whirlwind tour of psychotherapy.
It has, and it's amazing how much therapy has evolved to meet the unique needs of each age group.
It really is a testament to the creativity and flexibility of the field.
And the power of the human spirit to adapt and grow and heal throughout the lifespan.
Absolutely.
This feels like just the beginning of our exploration.
Oh, we've just scratched the surface.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll delve even further into the nuances of therapy across different age groups.
I can't wait to continue this conversation.
And I'm especially excited to hear your thoughts on how this knowledge might help you navigate your own personal growth and relationships.
It's all about applying these insights to our own lives.
Until then, keep those minds curious and keep diving deep. See you next time.
Welcome back to our deep dive into psychotherapy across the lifespan.
Yeah, we're picking up right where we left off.
Exploring how therapy really adapts to those unique challenges and opportunities.
Presented by each stage of life.
And I think last time we really covered a lot of ground,
We did.
from play-based therapy with children to those unique considerations for working with adolescents.
Yeah, a lot of developmental stuff.
But now we're venturing further into adulthood.
The grown-up years.
And this is where things get really interesting, because I think there are some unique stigmas and misconceptions that people face
Oh, for sure.
when it comes to seeking therapy as an adult.
It's like there's this pressure to have it all figured out
Exactly.
by the time you reach a certain age.
Yeah, like you're supposed to have it all together.
And if you don't,
You're somehow failing.
right, and that's just not realistic.
It's not. The reality is life is full of twists and turns, curveballs.
And sometimes we all need a little help navigating those transitions.
A little support.
And that's where therapy can be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely.
Providing a safe space
A non-judgmental space.
to process those experiences, explore different options, and develop coping mechanisms.
For those inevitable challenges that arise.
Because, let's face it, life is challenging.
It is.
And we don't always have the answers.
And that's okay.
It is okay to ask for help.
It's a sign of strength.
The last time we touched on some of the common issues faced by young adults.
Yeah, career uncertainties, relationship struggles, the pressures of starting a family.
Oh, good stuff.
But as we move into middle adulthood
Right.
and beyond, the focus often shifts.
Does it?
It does. There's a different set of themes that tend to emerge.
So what are we talking about here?
Well, as we enter middle adulthood,
That 40 to 65 range.
roughly,
Yeah.
there's often a greater emphasis on reflection,
Okay.
reevaluation, and finding a sense of purpose.
Purpose. That's a big
Yeah.
one.
It is, and one of the texts even mentions Erik Erikson
Oh, yes, Erickson.
and his stages of psychosocial development.
Always relevant.
He highlighted this challenge of generativity versus stagnation during this phase.
Generativity versus stagnation. That sounds